INEOS continues to make bold moves. The latest rumor is that England boss Gareth Southgate is being linked to Manchester United to replace Eric Ten Hag in the future. Welcome to the United Hotspot. My name is Webb, and here to talk about this interesting update that is making Gareth Southgate trend on Twitter. It is rare that you see this England boss trending unless he has pulled a masterpiece in a Euro or a World Cup. But with the season going on, Gareth Southgate trending on Twitter as he's being linked to the biggest football club in the world. Now, listen, I know for a fact that many of you might have heard it. So many managers, every day, a new guy is being linked to Manchester United. So many managers are being linked from the Zabi. They talk about players like managers like Frank Thomas. They talk about managers like Zabi Alonso. I've had links to managers like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer returning. So many managers have been linked to United, but Gareth Southgate for me, honestly, and I've read the responses, and people are disgusted by the idea. But I know it is said that he seems to have a good relationship with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Obviously, he's the England manager, the top boss in English football, really. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe is the richest man in the UK, or the richest football supporter in the UK. They certainly have met and spoken somewhere. There should be a certain level of mutual respect between the two. But I've had all the links we've had, and I have debunked some of them. I have, tried to digest a few of them. But honestly, Gary Southgate being linked to Manchester United and seeing what is being done around the structure of the club is not exactly shocking for me. And I honestly don't think it would be the worst idea. And I know when it comes to managing football clubs, he doesn't have the history or the pedigree. He was only at Middlesbrough, where he was manager for about 3 years, I think 2006, 2009. Then he moves on to the England under 21, then England in 2016. And that's where he has been for the longest time. And he has seen success. If you ask me, every year, I think for me, in every competition, Guy Southgate has led this England team as manager. They have been improving. And right now, my expectation is if they don't win the Euros, he's going to be sacked or he will resign by himself. I think they've got too much respect for him that sacking him would sound so mean. But I'm sure they will part ways if he doesn't win the Euros. That's a given. So that's probably for me, first of all. That gives me a feeling that maybe it's possible that he could be out of a job after the Euros. Maybe, and when that happens, again, it goes up to him. Would he want to take up a new project immediately? Would he want to go into a sabbatical for some time? But regardless, we know that Sir Jim Ratcliffe is the man who can make moves when it comes to football. In England, we saw what he did with Omar Berada. You saw what he's doing with Dan Ashworth. You see what he's doing with these other guys we are being linked with, Dougie Friedman and the likes. So he can get him out and convince him to leave England and come and start a new era at Manchester United. He's 53. That's for me a ripe age. I think of all the managers we are being linked with, he's one of those in a ripe age. I think with the exception of Jose Mourinho, who was being linked to a return and he denied it. But for me, this is why I think Gary Southgate would make a bit of sense. And Southgate, Carrick can now join the list of favorites from me, from the managers who are being linked with. Because, first of all, Gary Southgate's football, the England football, is not so far from what would sort of be able to play as Manchester United. It's not boring football, if you ask me. It's not exactly finesse and finesse. It's a cosmopolitan style of play that blends so many styles from different countries. For me, I think that's a style that could suit Manchester United and the supporters. It's not so far from what we fell in love with. That's one. Two, him joining, if Dan Ashworth came and Gareth Southgate is the manager, I think it would be obviously easy for them to implement what they did with the England DNA. I told you here of how Dan Ashworth and Gareth Southgate were the masterminds behind the England DNA that was first mooted, I think, in 2014 when Dan Ashworth was the FA director of elite football development and Southgate was the coach of the under 21s. That's when they sat together and came up with this idea of the England DNA and defined what an England national team player should look like at all levels, in all genders, the men and the women. And years after that, we've seen the success that they seem to achieve. I think this England has been more successful than even greater generations before them. So it's because they worked well together with Dan Ashworth to come up with this England DNA. and they were working with these young players together. Now, remember, before he came to the England national team, Gareth Southgate, he was working with the England under-21s. Now, all these youngsters, like you see today, players like Marcus Rashford, players like Declan Rice, players like Greenwood, name them. All the young England players, the Phil Fodens, he worked with them in the under-21s, in the junior ages. So he has been growing with them. Now, I relate that to Man United and working with them under the structure of the England DNA that was crafted or muted by him and Dan Ashworth. Now, imagine you bring that same template into club football and try it out. Of course, there are no guarantees in football that it will work, but you have this whole good structure that they are setting up. A structure mostly, if you realize it has got a core, English football. I think the idea for Sajim is to make Manchester United, the best football club in England first, because United, I think, is the poster boy of English football in terms of clubs. So for me, I think it's not so far-fetched. It makes sense because, why try to go for guys who have not worked together, tried and, who are not tried and tested under what you want to develop, when there are guys there who can be available, yet they have worked together and tried and tested and done what you want to be done. Because for me, what Dougie Friedman and Gareth Southgate did in 2014, 2015 in England with the England national team is exactly what Manchester United needs now. So, and there's not a lot of time for us to make it work. You would rather go for guys who have been tried and tested, done it before, and see what happens. Now, there are no guarantees in football that it will work, but for me, from the look of it, but even the profile of Gareth Southgate being an England manager for all these years, I think there are so few England bosses who have been in charge of that national team for all the years he's been there. And he's young. He was young. He came as a young manager. I think, and you've seen progress every year with every competition. I think he comes with a certain level of respect. And for some people, the disquiets we would have had with the likes of Dizabi, the likes of Michael Carrick, were always to do with respect, that this coach does not really have experience. Now, Southgate may not have the club experience, but being a national team manager, coached Middlesbrough before, and not, of course, it's never at the level of Man United, but the profile that he comes with will certainly command respect from anyone, because this has been the longest, probably, I think one of the longest serving England national team managers. So for me, I look at it and think about it and I'm like, maybe Southgate is not really a bad idea if you think about it, if we make the decision to part ways with Erik ten Hag. But also, Southgate, unlike many of these managers, and for me this is part of the reasons why he has been there as England boss for a long time, I think Southgate has given England an identity in terms of what they play. England was exciting to watch in the Euros, they were exciting to watch in the World Cup, they were balanced, they were solid yet effective and attacking. They had a proper balance in their style. Of course, a few mistakes, errors were made to deny them winning. But when it comes to the Euros, for example, you're thinking it's a Euro, it's a final, it could have gone anywhere. Italy themselves, who beat them, were an impeccable side. You cannot really fault Southgate for losing to Italy the way they did. Honestly, they played very good football by their standards as England. Right now, if you ask me, they are probably the best national team in the world. So think about all that and see what the idea, and see how it would look with Man United. Bearing in mind that Southgate would be working with a director of football, or a sporting director, Dan Ashworth, with whom they masterminded a legendary staff with England. In fact, I'll tell you, if England won the Euros or the World Cup, Gareth Southgate would be knighted. He would become Sir Gareth Southgate. Dan Ashworth could be knighted as well. Trust you me. That's how great these guys have been for English football. If England won any major competition today, I'll tell you, if England won the Euros that are coming up in June, Gareth Southgate and Dan Ashworth would be knighted. Now, that's how important they are in everything, every success we are seeing with this England team. So for me, whereas it's a report like so many, and we've been linked to so many, I think of the so many managers we've been linked with, I think Gareth Southgate makes sense. And it's funny that I hadn't thought about him, because honestly, being a national team coach and the comfort he's having with England, I didn't, he did cross my mind. But now that he's emerging, I look at the history, and I told you here why we were so fascinated with Dan Ashworth and the story of Dan Ashworth. You cannot talk about Dan Ashworth and England, the England DNA, and don't mention Gareth Southgate. So the two are a match made in heaven. So if we can have both of them to come and lead the rebirth of Man United, maybe it isn't the worst idea. My name is Webb. Subscribe, and I'll catch you later.